When people ask about sleep, they usually point to the standard advice. They count the hours, they look at the surface symptoms, and they conclude that mathematically it's just a simple game of inputs and outputs. You put in 8 hours, you get out alertness. You short yourself a few, you feel groggy. Simple arithmetic, right? But as a physicist looking at the human organism through the lens of thermodynamics and quantum molecular biology, I come to a very different, much more chilling conclusion. The question isn't whether your body can tolerate a disruption. The question is whether the delicate geometric and thermodynamic balance of your cellular matrix can survive the invisible tax the universe extracts from it every single second. Today, I want to show you why the laws of physics, specifically metabolic entropy, molecular friction, and the cellular horizon problem, are intentionally set up to make this process a matter of biological life or death. Now, look, I want you to forget everything you think you know about sleep as rest. That word, rest, is one of the most misleading words in all of biological science. When you close your eyes, nothing in your body rests. What actually happens is something far more profound, far more violent at the molecular level, and far more necessary for you to continue existing than any process you perform while you are awake. Sleep is not a pause in your biology. Sleep is when your biology does its most critical, most thermodynamically expensive work. And understanding why requires us to go all the way down, not to the organ, not to the cell, to the molecule, to the physics underneath the molecule. Let me set the stage properly. Every second of your waking life, your roughly 37 trillion cells are running chemical reactions, burning glucose, transporting ions across membranes, building proteins, firing electrochemical signals. All of this is work in the thermodynamic sense, real physical work with real energetic costs. And here is the thing the popular science version of health never tells you. Work, in the physics sense, always produces waste. Not because your body is inefficient, though it is somewhat, but because the second law of thermodynamics is not a suggestion. Entropy increases. Every time your mitochondria run the electron transport chain to produce ATP, they generate heat. Every time an ion pump on a neuron resets that neuron's membrane potential, it costs ATP and releases thermal energy into the cellular microenvironment. Every single protein your ribosomes fold into its correct three-dimensional geometry costs energy. And a fraction of those proteins misfold regardless because thermal fluctuations at biological temperatures make perfect folding a probabilistic, not a guaranteed outcome. This is what I mean by an invisible tax. You cannot run a machine without generating entropy. You cannot run a biological machine without accumulating damage. The question, and this is really the question, is how quickly you accumulate that damage and whether you have a mechanism powerful enough to reverse it before it crosses the threshold of irreversibility. Sleep is that mechanism, and it runs on a time scale and at an energetic cost that your waking brain simply cannot afford. Let me draw this on the board for a moment. Imagine this curve here, your cellular metabolic rate across a 24-hour cycle. During waking, you are here, up at the top, burning approximately 20 watts just in brain tissue alone. The neurons are firing, the synaptic vesicles are being recycled, the astrocytes are doing their maintenance work, the blood-brain barrier is holding its structural integrity under constant hydraulic pressure from cerebrospinal fluid flow. All of that costs energy. All of that produces molecular exhaust. And notice what I'm drawing here at the bottom of this energy production graph, the accumulation curve. This is your metabolic waste, misfolded proteins, oxidatively damaged lipids in your cell membranes, free radical byproducts from mitochondrial respiration, fragmented DNA from transcription errors. This accumulation curve doesn't level off during the day. It climbs. The harder you think, the steeper it climbs. Now, the popular science answer is that sleep gives your body a break so it can catch up. But let's be very precise here, because that framing misses the actual physics. It's not that your body catches up during sleep. It's that certain critical repair processes are thermodynamically incompatible with being awake. They cannot run simultaneously. And the reason for that is resource competition at the level of ATP allocation. Your brain consumes roughly 20% of your body's total energy budget while representing only about 2% of your body's mass. That is an extraordinary thermodynamic anomaly. And during waking, nearly all of that energy is committed to the business of consciousness, sensory integration, motor planning, memory encoding, emotional regulation, homeostatic monitoring. The repair processes, the cleanup machinery, exist in a state of perpetual energy starvation during your waking hours. They are running, but they are running far below the rate required to keep pace with the damage being generated. Let me give you a concrete example because this is where it gets genuinely alarming. Your neurons produce a protein called amyloid beta as a normal metabolic byproduct, not a pathological product, a normal one. Under healthy conditions, this protein is cleared from the interstitial spaces of the brain by a system that was only properly characterized in 2013 called the glymphatic system. And here is the critical physics of that system. It operates primarily during sleep. During sleep, the brain's interstitial space, the fluid-filled gaps between cells, expands by approximately 60%. 60%. This is not a minor adjustment. This is a massive geometric restructuring of the cellular microenvironment, driven by the coordinated shrinkage of astrocytes. And the consequence of this expansion is that cerebrospinal fluid can flow through the interstitial space at a rate roughly 10 times higher than during waking. It's a convective flush, a pressure-driven rinsing of the brain's extracellular matrix. Now think about what that means thermodynamically. The glymphatic system requires the brain to reduce its own cellular volume to increase the available fluid channels. That requires active cellular work, ion transport, cytoskeletal remodeling, aquaporin channel regulation. You cannot run this process while simultaneously maintaining the high-frequency neural oscillations of wakefulness. The energy budget doesn't balance. The cellular geometry doesn't allow it. It is, in a very real sense, a matter of either you are awake or you are being cleaned. You cannot do both. The universe doesn't offer you that deal. It's a bit of a nuisance for our daily routines, but the ledger must balance. And the ledger gets more complex the deeper you look. Let me pull back from the glymphatic system and talk about something even more fundamental: the informational integrity of your genome. Every cell in your body contains approximately 6 feet of DNA, compacted into a nucleus about 6 micrometers in diameter. This compaction is achieved through a remarkably precise system of protein spools called histones. The DNA wraps around these histones, and the degree of winding and unwinding controls which genes are accessible to transcription machinery and which are silenced. This is epigenetics in the physical sense, the mechanical regulation of information access. And during waking, under the stress of normal metabolism, oxidative damage to both the DNA bases and the histone proteins accumulates continuously. Now, your cells have repair machinery: base excision repair, nucleotide excision repair, double-strand break repair. Remarkable molecular machines. But here is what most people don't appreciate. Many of these repair processes are regulated by the circadian clock. They are preferentially active during specific phases of the sleep cycle. There is a reason for this. The transcriptional machinery that reads your DNA to build proteins occupies many of the same physical locations on the genome as the repair enzymes. They compete for the same molecular real estate. Run transcription at maximum rate, and you physically obstruct the repair machinery. Let transcription wind down, as it does during sleep, and the repair machinery finally has access to the damaged sites it needs to fix. This is an information theory problem as much as it is a biochemistry problem. Think of your genome as a communication channel. During waking, that channel is being read continuously at high bandwidth, but a channel that is always in use for reading cannot simultaneously undergo error correction. You need downtime in the channel to run the parity checks, to identify the corrupted bits, to overwrite the errors. Sleep is the mandatory maintenance window for the most critical information storage system in the known universe, your own genetic code. And when that maintenance window is shortened or eliminated, the errors accumulate. Mutation rates in rapidly dividing cells increase. Epigenetic marks are misplaced. The chemical tags that determine which genes are expressed and which are silenced begin to drift from their correct positions. This is not a theoretical concern. This is measurable in human subjects after even modest sleep restriction. 5 or 6 hours per night for a week, and you can detect significant changes in the expression of genes involved in immune function, metabolic regulation, and inflammatory signaling. The body's informational infrastructure is degrading in real time, and it is degrading at a rate that outstrips its capacity to repair itself. Let me bring this to the synaptic level because I think it's where the argument becomes most viscerally compelling. During waking, your neurons form and strengthen synaptic connections as you learn, experience, and encode memories. This is called synaptic potentiation, and it is metabolically expensive. Every strengthened synapse requires more postsynaptic receptor proteins, more mitochondria to power the increased local activity, more structural proteins to maintain the enlarged dendritic spine. By the end of a waking day, your neural circuits are, in a measurable and literal sense, heavier, more connected, more energetically loaded. Now here's the thermodynamic problem. A system that only accumulates complexity and energetic load cannot run indefinitely. There is a ceiling, a saturation point, beyond which new learning becomes impossible because the signal-to-noise ratio in the synaptic network collapses. Every synapse you add is noise relative to the signal of the next synapse you need to form. The network approaches what you might call informational saturation, and the only way to restore the dynamic range of the system, to clear the noise floor, to reset the baseline, is to selectively downscale the synaptic weights, not eliminate memories, but reduce the gain across the entire network proportionally so that the relative differences between strong and weak connections, the actual structure of your learned information, are preserved while the energetic and structural overhead is reduced. This is the synaptic homeostasis hypothesis, and its thermodynamic elegance is, I think, underappreciated. During slow-wave sleep, the brain runs a kind of global normalization process. The electroencephalogram shows large, synchronized, low-frequency oscillations, slow waves. And these slow waves correspond to periods of coordinated synaptic downscaling across large cortical regions. The synaptic machinery is being globally recalibrated. ATP stores in neurons are being replenished. Local protein synthesis is occurring at newly strengthened synapses to consolidate the day's most important memories into long-term structure. And the overall metabolic load of the neural network is being reduced to a sustainable baseline for the next waking period. This process takes time. It is not instantaneous. It follows a characteristic timescale set by the kinetics of the underlying molecular machinery, the rate at which AMPA receptors are internalized from synaptic membranes, the rate at which the ubiquitin proteasome system degrades excess synaptic scaffolding proteins, the rate at which astrocytes recycle excess neurotransmitters from the synaptic cleft. These are slow processes relative to the millisecond timescales of neural firing. They require hours. The physics of the molecular machinery sets the minimum duration of adequate sleep, and that duration, across the mammalian kingdom, is remarkably consistent. It clusters around 7 to 9 hours in humans, not because evolution is conservative or because culture has anchored us to an artificial norm, because the kinetics of molecular repair set a hard lower bound, and the second law of thermodynamics enforces it without appeal. But it gets even more depressing when you consider the thermodynamic balance sheet of what happens to your hormonal architecture during a full 8-hour sleep. Growth hormone, and don't let the name mislead you, this isn't just about growing taller, is released primarily during slow wave sleep in a single large pulse, typically in the first half of the night. Growth hormone is a systemic repair signal. It upregulates protein synthesis across virtually every tissue in the body. It promotes lipolysis, the mobilization of fatty acids from adipose tissue to fuel cellular repair processes. It stimulates insulin-like growth factor 1, which promotes tissue regeneration and cell survival. In the liver, the kidney, the skeletal muscle, the immune system, all of this regenerative work is triggered by a hormonal signal that is only generated during sufficient slow-wave sleep. If you cut your sleep short, say 6 hours instead of 8, you truncate the slow-wave sleep period disproportionately. The brain's sleep architecture is not a uniform distribution of sleep stages through the night. Slow-wave sleep is front-loaded, REM sleep is back-loaded. Cut the night short and you cut slow-wave sleep significantly, which means you cut the growth hormone pulse, which means you cut the repair signal that every tissue in your body is waiting for. The cells of your gut lining, which turn over completely every 3 to 5 days, have less regenerative drive. Your immune cells, which require growth hormone-driven cytokine signaling to maintain their functional state, become subtly impaired. Your skeletal muscle, even if you trained that day, has a blunted anabolic signal. The repair is incomplete. And notice what's happening here at the systems level. The damage accumulated during waking, the oxidative stress, the metabolic waste, the synaptic overload, the DNA lesions, all of it is being addressed by processes that have defined kinetics and defined energetic requirements. The 8-hour window is not arbitrary. It is the minimum time required for the sequential execution of these overlapping repair programs. The glymphatic flush, the synaptic downscaling, the hormonal repair cascade, the immune memory consolidation, the epigenetic maintenance. These processes have to happen in a particular order, driven by the architecture of the sleep cycle, and they collectively require approximately 8 hours to complete their primary functions. Fall short of that, and you are not merely tired. You are running a biological machine with deferred maintenance. The question is not whether the machine can run in that state. It obviously can, for a while. The question is what the compounding cost looks like over months and years. Let me sketch this on the board. Here's your cellular damage accumulation curve. Here's your repair capacity curve. During a full 8-hour sleep, repair capacity exceeds damage accumulation, and you arrive at morning with a net positive on the molecular ledger. Now look what happens when I truncate sleep to 6 hours. The repair capacity curve doesn't reach its full integral. There's a residual damage burden left at morning. And here's the cruel physics of compounding. That residual burden raises the baseline for the next day. Day 2 starts with more accumulated damage than day 1 started with. Day 3 starts higher still. The curves are drifting apart. And because most of the damage is invisible, you cannot feel a misfolded protein, you cannot sense an oxidatively damaged mitochondrial membrane, you cannot detect a subtle epigenetic drift in your inflammatory gene regulation. The physiological debt is accumulating silently, below the threshold of conscious awareness, until it isn't. This is what epidemiology keeps rediscovering and what physicists would predict from first principles. Chronic short sleep, even modestly short sleep, 6 hours rather than 8, sustained over years, is associated with dramatically elevated risk of essentially every major chronic disease of aging: cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, neurodegenerative disease, immune dysfunction, metabolic syndrome. Not because sleep deprivation is a risk factor in the vague correlational sense, but because all of these diseases share a common upstream cause: the failure of cellular repair mechanisms to keep pace with cellular damage accumulation. Sleep deprivation doesn't cause these diseases through some mysterious indirect pathway. It is the direct mechanism. It is the removal of the body's primary maintenance window, and the diseases are the predictable consequence of running a machine without maintenance across biological timescales. Now, don't get confused by the popular science version of health on this point. There is a lot of noise in the public discourse about optimizing sleep, about sleep trackers and temperature protocols and light exposure timing. Some of that is useful. Most of it is rearranging deck chairs. The foundational physics is simple. You need approximately 8 hours of consolidated sleep to allow the sequential execution of the body's repair programs. The molecular machinery has kinetic constraints. The thermodynamic ledger has to balance. You do not outsmart the second law of thermodynamics by wearing a smartwatch. Let me follow that molecular logic to its conclusion, because I think there is something philosophically important here that goes beyond the physiology. What we are really talking about is the relationship between time and biological integrity. The body exists in time, not outside of it. And the second law of thermodynamics tells us that systems existing in time tend toward disorder. This is not a flaw in biology. It is the fundamental constraint that biology has had to solve over 4 billion years of evolution, just to persist at all. And the solution that evolution arrived at, the solution that works, the solution that every complex multicellular organism on this planet uses, is periodic maintenance, mandatory downtime, enforced repair. The circadian rhythm is not a quirk of evolutionary history. It is the deepest architectural feature of biological existence. It is how life solves the thermodynamic problem of persisting in a universe governed by entropy. Sleep in this framing is not a luxury. It is not a lifestyle choice. It is not something you earn by being tired enough. It is the scheduled maintenance interval of the most complex, self-organizing thermodynamic system in the known universe, your body. And the laws of physics have set the price, and the price is 8 hours, and it is not negotiable. What strikes me, standing here at this chalkboard, is how completely backwards the modern conversation about sleep has gotten. We treat sleep as something we fit in around the rest of our lives. We talk about sleep deprivation as a badge of productivity, as evidence of drive, as the price of ambition. From a physics standpoint, this is not brave. It is simply wrong about how the machine works. You would not run an internal combustion engine without ever changing the oil and call it dedication to driving. The engine runs, right up until the moment it doesn't, and the failure is not subtle. The same logic applies here, and the timescales are longer, which makes the error harder to see and easier to rationalize. But the thermodynamic reality doesn't care about your rationalizations. The molecular damage is accumulating whether or not you acknowledge it. The cellular horizon, the point at which the accumulated damage load exceeds the system's repair capacity in a way that becomes irreversible, is approaching on a trajectory set by your daily choices. Every night of adequate sleep pushes that horizon back. Every night of insufficient sleep draws it closer. And I think if people genuinely understood this, not as a health tip, not as a wellness trend, but as a fundamental physical constraint on biological existence, the conversation would be very different. We would talk about 8 hours of sleep the way we talk about eating, the way we talk about breathing, not as something you optimize or hack or fit in when convenient, as a basic requirement of being a functioning biological system in a universe governed by thermodynamics. The laws of physics are not waiting for you to catch up. They are already running the ledger. Every second, the entropy of your cellular machinery increases. Every second, the repair systems are working against that tide. And for approximately 8 hours every night, those repair systems, given the energy and the time and the molecular architecture they need, can win. They can balance the ledger. They can push the horizon back and give you another day. That is what 8 hours of sleep does to your body. It is not rest. It is not downtime. It is the only mechanism the universe has provided for keeping the second law of thermodynamics from finishing its work on you ahead of schedule. Don't squander it.